Allegedly it will, but I am just going to check before we actually begin because the delay or whatnot, you know, you never know. It is live. All right. Awesome. So let's get her started here. And I can see audience chat questions. So if anybody is out in the ether, I can see your inquiries if it's beyond just us. But let's just get into the normal nitty gritty of the show details here. This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And welcome live to this very special episode that we have for you today. We are joined by author Andrew Buss, who has written a book. And just for the audience out there, that is I Am McLovin, How Superbad Became the Biggest Comedy Hit of Its Generation. That is releasing this coming Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. My first question here, Andrew, is obviously this is going to be in, I would assume, hardcover. Do you know when the paperback and maybe an audiobook might be available?
So it's actually starting out as or not starting out as, so it actually is paperback, not in hardcover. Got it right there.
Perfect.
Yeah,
it's great
nice
cover.
Glossy cover. Yeah, I really like it. I think it came out well. The colors match kind of the overall vibe of the film. I was very specific about making sure that we capture the essence of that kind of 70s throwback feel with the cover of the book.
Yeah, the movie kind of takes place out of time. Like it's contemporary because they have some contemporary technologies, but they have all this like 70s funk music, and the clothing styles are just a little awkward and kind of outside of time. So it's hard to nail down exactly when this is supposed to take place.
It is. They have cell phones, so it definitely is
right
modern in terms of 2007. But and I think that kind of sets them as outcasts from the rest of kind of their peers. So I definitely think that's a cool way to accomplish it.
And before we get too much further, did you just want to give a little bit of background to our audience on who you are, kind of your individual background, and then where people can find not only your work, but you maybe online?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for the last decade. After going to film school, I kind of shifted into journalism. I've written for Vanity Fair, Vulture, The Daily Beast, Consequence of Sound, The Laugh Button, as well as also the editor over at 800 Pound Gorilla News. Oh, and I've also written for Late Nighter. And so I've been doing this a little while. And then I also had a book come out in 2023 called Top 5, How High Fidelity Found Its Rhythm and Became a Cult Movie Classic. That was a book about the making of the film High Fidelity and kind of followed that journey. And you can find the books at any of your local retailers. You can find them online at Amazon or a variety of different places, Barnes and Noble, wherever you go to find books, it'll be there. And then me, you can find me at Andrew L. Buss. I'm at Andrew L. Buss on X, Twitter, and Instagram. So you can find me there.
Excellent. Now, we will have all of your information, background, category stuff, your links and so on in our website when we publish the website version or the summary version of this that we do with all of our episodes. So there will be an accompanying website entry that we will post, but we'll also make sure that he is linked on all of our social pages as we kind of promote this after the fact. Even though this is a live version of the show, we'll make sure that we promote the heck out of it for you taking some time to talk with us about the book. Now, I did not have a chance to thoroughly read it in quite the detail level that my father did. The consequences of going to law school and working full time and then doing the podcast at the same time. I was able to get a few good nuggets out of this one, but I think my dad will have much more substantive questions than I will. But let me just start with something very general that we often do. What is your relationship to this movie?
So my relationship to the movie goes back to August 17th, 2007, which is the day that it came out. I was very excited about Superbad because I was a big fan of 40-Year-Old Virgin, which was the first R-rated movie that I ever saw in a movie theater, not counting, when I was like 6 months old and my mom would go see an R-rated, my mom and dad would go see an R-rated movie. It had nothing to do with me. So they would bring me into those. When I was like 6 months. But anyway, beyond that, I hadn't seen one until 40-Year-Old Virgin in the theater. TV is a different thing. But so I was already a big fan of that group, the Apatow gang, if you will. And then Knocked Up I really loved. So I was really excited for Superbad. And then I knew I wanted to see it that night it came out. I was so just, pumped for it. And then I wound up going with my dad and my grandfather. It was one of two occasions when there was the three generation of men like bonding, that kind of thing. So it's really special in my mind for that. And then also the reception. It was a completely sold out screening in the middle of the suburbs of Illinois, and great, 7 p.m. Friday night crowd. And it played so well. To this day, it is the best screening of a movie I've ever attended because the audience ate every bit of it up. It's one of those moments that you just don't forget about. And it reminds, all of us why we love movies so much. It's moments like that of the shared experience of it all. It's very special. And beyond that, the movie is just really funny. And so it's one of my favorite comedies of all time. So there's multiple different layers as to what Superbad means to me.
So I, like you, was kind of a teenager during this era, and I grew up on a lot of these comedies kind of almost after the fact. My parents were not as entertaining to taking me to R-rated comedies.
I tried.
Not my father's doing, my mother's doing more than his. I
You
think
threw
you
me under the
probably,
bus when I did.
Well, that's fair. That is fair.
Mom,
but the only one
Dad took me to an R-rated movie.
The only one that I remember of this era really seeing was not R-rated. It was Dodgeball. And the only reason we went to Dodgeball was because I was under grounding to my room for 2 weeks and got stir crazy. So I decided to take everybody else to the movie. That was my way of getting out, was paying to get everybody out of the house. But this is an era with obviously Anchorman, Wedding Crashers. I mean, this is like an R-rated comedy boom. I think you've done an oral history on Zoolander. That's not quite R-rated, but that I would fit in this kind of general category.
It's edgy. It's a movie about trying to assassinate the Prime Minister of Malaysia. It's edgy, and it's a comedy, and it's about male models. Yes, it's a very edgy movie. It definitely teeters on R-rated, I would say.
But Knocked Up,
Wait,
I remember
is it
being
R-rated? Because I'm trying to think. It is PG-13.
I don't think Zoolander is. No, I think it's PG-13.
I was trying to think how racy the orgy scene gets.
Oh, well, that's true, but honestly, it's such an enigma that I think it kind of goes past the teenage viewer who doesn't really understand what that's supposed to represent. And when, what is it, the Tandoori dwarf is in there, you're just like, what the fuck? So anyway, moving past that, but yeah, Knocked Up was a huge movie when I was in high school, and Step Brothers, etc. But the only one that I remember actually seeing in theaters was when I actually passed the age of 18, and that was Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which is still one of my personal favorite ones. But I remember loving this Apatow crew too. It came to be that I'd watch a lot of these on DVD well after the fact because you kind of had to wait for them. You couldn't see them in theaters if you were not of age. And that was my only entry point to watching these, is watching them and then rewatching them and then rewatching them well after the fact that they came out. Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle comes to mind, that run of films. And while they're all by somewhat different creators, the Apatow group is somewhat at the center of all of these, whether it be the Will Ferrell group that kind of creates its own branch off of Apatow after Anchorman, and then he kind of goes with all of his Freaks and Geeks cohorts to doing these kinds of movies. And I also distinctly remember my relationship being, I really enjoyed Jonah Hill in this movie. I really enjoyed Michael Cera in this movie. I obviously enjoyed Rogen and Bill Hader, and I've had relationships with all of them primarily due to being introduced to them through this movie, let alone one of the great actresses of our time, Emma Stone.
Of course. I mean, yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about Superbad is everybody went on to excel. And I also think part of that is also Judd Apatow's kind of eye for talent. Even though he was just an executive producer, he was looming pretty large in those decision makings. My take is he wasn't necessarily on set every day, but his presence was definitely felt. Because this was the first movie where I'm post 40-Year-Old Virgin. So this was the first movie after he was Judd Apatow, this comedy director, where he was really, kind of taking one of his cohorts and kind of pushing them to the front in terms of letting them make their own movie. Because Knocked Up was still him directing and had written it. So this was the first one, that he would do it, Forgetting Sarah Marshall and so on and so on, where he was really championing other creativity.
So, Dad, I know that you obviously don't have quite the same relationship that Andrew or I do, not having grown up with this film. I think you said this week in watching it, it was the first time that you'd watched it in its full entirety and didn't just catch bits and pieces of it when I had seen it.
Correct. You would put it on and you'd be watching it. I'd come in, I'd sit down, I'd watch. I think I'd probably watched 3/4 of it. And some of those scenes I've probably watched 7 or 8 times. But no, I mean, it's just kind of a generational thing. And back about that time, you guys were all teenagers, but I'm working full time, and I didn't get to the movies as much as I wanted to even then, although it was more than when you guys were really small. But for me, my first R-rated movie attempt was Caddyshack, and I was so pissed off because 2 friends of mine went the day before and they never got carded, and they were actually like almost a year younger than me, and I, being 3 months short of 17, was prevented from going in the next day. So,
wow.
Oh well.
Did you sneak in? How'd you get in?
I didn't. I had to wait for it to come on HBO. Because that's even it was about the time that VHS was just starting. So you just had to wait for it. So I was ticked. But anyway. So that's kind of my knowledge or thing about it. Hey, I have a question for you, Andrew, that
yes.
In your acknowledgments, you mentioned that you did stand-up as a teen.
Did I?
Okay. Yes.
I mentioned that. Jesus.
And I was struck by how this kind of relates to Seth Rogen's journey, including the writing aspect. You became more of a journalist. He became more of a screenwriter. Do you think that that's part of your resonance with this film? Is that you kind of have that same mentality at times as Seth Rogen?
Wow, I've not thought of that till you just said that. I perhaps subconsciously, but no, not immediately. I mean, stand-up was the dream when I was a kid, but I was doing more comedy songs. That's what I was doing. So I was doing more in the vein of a Bo Burnham, Stephen Lynch, I guess peripheral kind of Adam Sandler-esque stuff.
Okay.
So it was, it was more about, being as raunchy as possible when you're 16, because the joke was, oh, this 16-year-old is singing about things that he clearly knows nothing about. Like, I wasn't singing about being in high school. I was singing about things I don't even want to say. But I mean, so that was my experience with stand-up, and I only did it for a couple of years before I realized that gimmick was going to run out very quickly, and I didn't feel enough of a pull to stand-up as much as I love comedy, and comedy is, my favorite thing in the world. I love stand-up. I'll see it all the time. I've seen it multiple times in the last couple of weeks, but I didn't feel enough of a drive personally to write jokes. So I kind of shifted towards filmmaking, and then eventually shifted towards journalism. But I've not thought of that.
Yeah, you obviously have an interest in comedy and film. What motivated you? What got you interested in those two areas?
It was my upbringing. It was just kind of surrounding myself with I was, a 90s kid. So a lot of that was my discovery of comedies actually came from what my parents were watching. I was watching Billy Madison at 3 years old. And I was quickly banned from watching it after I started going around the house saying Donkey Kong sucks. But I remember that Billy Madison was a big movie. The Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey movies were huge. The Mask was big. Liar, Liar. Happy Gilmore. I remember seeing Big Daddy in the theater. I remember I had a pillow with me because what was I? It would have been like 5 or 6. But I loved Adam Sandler, so they brought me. It was like a 8:00 showing, 8 at night. And I remember waking up long enough for the vomit scene and then falling back asleep. That's all I remember about Big Daddy. But seeing it then, I've since seen it many times over the years. But
Okay,
yeah, I mean, that was the draw.
Well, that leads me into the next question I had, which is I noticed your dedication immediately and noted that it was dedicated to your father and grandfather. And then you talk more about them again in the acknowledgments.
Yes.
Since this show is a father-son show and the studio name is after my dad, who started me on the movie trajectory, what kind of relationship did you have with your dad and grandfather, and in that aspect with movies and comedy, and even in your career choice of writing?
Yeah, I mean, so as far as my grandfather, who had passed away when I was 17, but he had moved to Florida when I was 7, so I would only see him, maybe a couple times, a couple pockets a year. But when I'd see him for a week or two. I mean, my grandfather and I definitely, yeah, I mean, I remember we would talk about TV and movies, not as much, but I remember at one point, I think he only had one VHS tape, and this is how long ago it was. I don't think they had purchased any DVDs, but I remember the one VHS tape they had was, I'm going to say it was Bill Cosby himself. So that was the one that they had. So I remember watching that with him. And then I remember, yeah, we would watch movies over the years. There is a funny story, though, with him, which was another movie theater experience, which was I really wanted to see, and it's Apatow as well. I wanted to see the movie Funny People, and he wanted to see Transformers 2. So in the theater. And so what had happened though was at that point, 2009, I was, like 8 months shy of 18 or 17, because you have to be 17. I was 8 months shy of 17. So what we did is he got an adult ticket for Funny People, and he got a child's ticket or just a regular ticket for Transformers. It wasn't a child's. I was 16 by that point. And we just swapped tickets. So that always made me laugh. That, my grandfather went to see Transformers 2, and I went into this melodrama about a guy that has cancer, but this comedic dramedy, not melodrama. It's dramedy, but it's very dark and deep. But the movie's around the same amount of time. Anyway, that was my grandfather and I would connect over certain movies, TV, not as much. My dad introduced me to the Three Stooges when I was a kid, and that was something we were able to bond over. I remember, over the years, we definitely have had that kind of relationship with different things. I got to introduce him to the Kevin Smith films. That was a proud moment. I introduced him to Family Guy in as much as I was watching it one day, and I'm not even the biggest Family Guy fan, but I'm watching it like early one morning, and then just because, and then he sat down and started watching it, and then he turned into a big fan of Family Guy. So, that connection. But yeah, my dad and I definitely connect over TV and film, and if he thinks going to a movie theater and seeing a raunchy R-rated comedy like Superbad is bad, just wait till I tell you the one we saw the next year was Zack and Mary Make a Porno in the theater. So that I really don't know what the hell we were thinking. I'm baffled that we did that, but we definitely connected over those movies. Austin Powers. I mean, we have a very strong kind of connection to TV and film in that vein, and it definitely influenced me, particularly the Three Stooges. That always stuck with me.
Yeah, for my father, he introduced me to Abbott and Costello.
Nice.
And he was a huge Jack Benny fan. And then the only time he would ever stay up and watch The Tonight Show is if either Jonathan Winters or Buddy Hackett was a guest. And so whenever they were on, sometimes he would if they were on a Friday night, he would let me stay up and watch. And then he'd always tell me the jokes he couldn't tell on the air.
I love that. Jonathan Winters, oh my God, what a talent. Like, just that, the mind, and it says something when, Robin Williams, who everyone thinks of as the quickest comedian of all time, well, he was influenced by Jonathan Winters, who had just a mind of his own as far as how quick he was.
Okay.
So turning back to the film itself, what would you say is, I guess there's the story and then there's the plot. The plot is pretty easy to kind of configure, but what is the film story about to you?
The story is about these two best friends that are going away to different colleges, and it's about separation anxiety. That's what Superbad is. The plot is, of course, two guys try to get alcohol to impress their dream girl. That's not what the film is actually about, though. It's about these two best friends that are going away to different schools and are trying to adjust to that, and they're having this journey together. I mean, the movie is about them, the two guys, and I mean, it's a bromance. That's really what Superbad is, more than anything else. As raunchy as it is, I mean, it looks like on the surface it's a completely different movie. It's a bit of a Trojan horse in that sense. The trailer makes you think, oh, this is just going to be one of those raunchy, wild sex comedies, teen sex comedies, and it really isn't that. There's a lot of raunchiness in it, and there's a lot of that, but that's not what Superbad is.
I would tend to agree. I think that it is much more about the relationship between the two of them, because while it sells you on the bait of these two guys who are virgins hooking up with their intended lovers for the first time, realistically, at the end of the night, they're sleeping with each other, and then they wake up the next morning with each other. But the way that the ending has always struck me, especially in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, I think this is somewhat of a relationship or a friendship breakup movie. That they realize that they're growing apart naturally, of course, but that everything that they've had up to their lives has been together. And now they're going to have to separate really for the first time. And taking off of what you said, dealing with those issues of the separation that's incoming for the first time, like really letting it set in and what their lives are going to be like without each other, which is why the lasting image at the end of the film is them looking back at each other longingly as they slowly separate.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really powerful stuff. Remember, coming from two guys who, when the movie came out, were 25 years old. Like it, because as much as what I really wanted to come across in the book is, it's not just the journey of a movie getting made. It's not, the book is not just about the making of Superbad. The book is about the two guys, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who started this movie as teenagers, as 13-year-olds. They started writing it then. Time it came out, it was 12 years later. And so I feel like even though the movie isn't so much about themselves, nobody is playing Seth Rogen or Evan Goldberg in the movie. They're playing two characters named Seth and Evan. They're completely separate from each other. That being said, they are completely connected in so many ways, given the fact that they wrote it and, so much of their own high school experience is reflected in the film. But yeah, I mean, the separation anxiety is such a big part of it. Like, that's really what the movie is. And it's the kind of thing, I didn't catch that when I was 14 and saw it for the first time. I caught it as just a really funny, raunchy, R-rated comedy. I didn't catch the nuance of it until I was older and realized, oh, this isn't a comedy. This is a film. Like, there are two separate things. And I really got to appreciate how deep it was. And I marvel at the fact that, these two young guys were able to write this thing. But of course, that came over. They weren't Superbad today wasn't Superbad when they were 13. They developed it over the years. Like, as I write about in the book, it came together many, many years later at the urging of Judd Apatow and another guy, director by the name of Jake Kasdan, kind of worked with them. He didn't write anything, but he kind of worked directly with them to help shape the script.
And I would say that even though several of Apatow's movies directly deal with a larger theme or something that's maybe not immediately apparent, but definitely worthy of consideration, the modern family being kind of instructive of what Knocked Up is or becomes. Forgetting Sarah Marshall, I think, is a larger thematic movie than it appears on the surface. This one to me is the one with probably the most depth and heart based on what its predecessors had. I mean, we think of in a lot of the movies that were comparative in the time of its reviews, Dazed and Confused, American Graffiti. There are plenty of other ones I could name. Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
That got the closest. Fast Times got the closest, I would say, because of the serious themes that it dealt with. I mean, it deals with abortion. It deals with. It definitely had a mix between being funny and dealing with some really important kind of subject matter.
This one, in a way that several of the other ones don't, because while I would say this film does have, you've mentioned the word raunchy a few different times. I think that the humor is not all that separated from what teens actually talk about and how they talk about it in a way that I think that, like 40-Year-Old Virgin, as much as I love it, there's really no circumstance where I find most of that movie to be particularly believable to the conversations I would have in my 40s, even amongst a guy who is somewhat Arrested Developed.
Well, an Asia poster, that's definitely. Yeah.
I mean, there's moments in there, like, especially coming from the younger guys. Not so. I mean, coming from, like, all right, this is very, I guess you could call it problematic today, but the conversation between Seth Rogen and Paul Rudd, the "you know how I know you're gay." Those are the conversations that 20-something-year-olds were having in 2005. That's very reflective of the time. But I definitely see your point, and I feel that way with that and Knocked Up as well. There is something about those films, great films that I really enjoy. There is something about them that isn't as reflective of kind of the way people talk, despite the fact that a lot of it is ad-libbed. I feel like Superbad had the advantage of being toiled over for over a decade because they got to rework the script so many times and rewrite things. And I feel like it's at that advantage because I do think of all the Apatow films, even Seth Rogen movies, I think it's the best written. I really do. Because it came from such a real, authentic place that they were not that far removed from at that point. And that's not a slam against any of their other films whatsoever. It's just, for me, this is the one that I feel like came the most out of wearing their heart on their sleeve.
So while this movie is not the biggest financial success out of any of the Apatow run, and I actually was surprised that it finished number 33 worldwide that year, despite hundreds of millions of dollars.
Wow. That's because that summer it made $4 billion at the box office. I read about it in the book. It was, I'm not even kidding, like 4 months, $4 billion. It was the year of Harry Potter, 5, I think? It was Shrek 3rd. Right. It was Pirates of the Caribbean at a sequel. Fantastic Four 2.
For more money.
Fantastic Four 2 is one. And then you have other movies, like the Simpsons movie came out. Like, it was a massive year at the box office. So they definitely had their work cut out for them. Rush Hour 3 is another sequel. Yeah, it was a year of sequels. And so having an original comedy, it makes sense that it was only 33 at the box office for the entire year. That does unfortunately make sense. Although $170 million now might get you to number 5 in this day and age with the way that people go to movies, unfortunately.
But I guess my question would be, what would be your argument for why, and it's implied in the title of your book, why this is the number one hit of all of this kind of run of the R-rated comedy boom of this 10-year period, roughly?
I would say it's because of the fact that so when Knocked Up came out and when 40-Year-Old Virgin came out, they did very well at the box office. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think Knocked Up might have done better.
It did by 100. It was 190 to 148. I looked it up.
148. I thought it was 170. It's 148.
Domestic. I just looked up the domestics.
Domestic, got it. Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think combined it was probably 170 because it was a hard sell overseas, as I write about in the book. Their press tour was kind of bananas over there, but I think the reason why I do think it is that movie is because not so much how it did immediately, but how it's viewed upon today. And by the way, the other movies, when they came out, 40-Year-Old Virgin and Knocked Up, did well, really well with critics and audiences. Everybody really enjoyed them. But it wasn't like Superbad in as much as Superbad was inescapable. And then on DVD, it did so well. They made so much money on home video. It really did. I mean, Superbad was everywhere in 2007. And because of McLovin and the ID, marketability. And so that t-shirt was everywhere. The quotes were everywhere. I haven't heard a lot of 40-Year-Old Virgin or Knocked Up quotes in the wild, but I've heard a lot of Superbad quotes in the wild. And and over the years, as the years have gone on, it still persists. And I think it's the universal appeal of it. I think it doesn't matter what generation you are when you watch Superbad, because there is that weird mix we talked about where it's set in modern day, but it's got the throwback elements. It's not tethered to one specific generation or one era. The fact that I was able to watch it with my dad and my grandfather, and all three of us loved the movie and laughed really hard at it. I mean, that right there is the evidence of it's a movie for everybody. And it's not even a movie just for guys. Like, you know, I know a lot of women that love that movie. And my sister a couple of years ago was in Forever 21 in the girls department and found a shirt that had the three of them on the bus. It was, Seth, Evan, and McLovin riding the bus. Just this cool black and white shirt. So that tells you everything. It's, you know, the reach is pretty wide. So I definitely think that's why it is such a massive hit for the generation, but also beyond its generation.
I think about 3 years ago, I found a Visa gift card that the cover was the McLovin driver's license.
I love that. I have not seen that.
I'm like, really? This long after the movie came out?
Yes.
And yeah.
I would agree with that, even though I think financially Knocked Up was a bigger hit in the moment. It seems to have come and gone. Like, I don't think too many people have thought about that movie since, except maybe those that decided to watch the sequel when it came out. And I still have no idea why they did the sequel. But
or if they stumble onto the E channel, because E, at one point, I don't know if they still do it, at one point, and I don't even have cable anymore, but at E, for many, many years, ran that movie at least once every couple days.
that would make sense. But even so, I find them to be forgotten in a way that certain, like, Will Ferrell ones, if you ask people of my generation, the common people that don't watch a ton of movies, the first ones that are going to be out of their mouth are Anchorman, Superbad, or Step Brothers. And it's one of those three almost universally.
Absolutely. I mean, and those really are I mean, and that was really the shift. Will Ferrell was the shift away from the safe PG-13 movies, even though Anchorman is a PG-13 movie. He was kind of a shift away from the Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey, where it's more silly and sophomoric, into this completely different vein. And I feel like Superbad's right up there with it.
I would say if I'm, and this is going to go on a completely different tangent, but I'll entertain it for the second,
Sure.
Or for a second here. The difference between, like, Adam Sandler with what you grew up on and some of the stuff that came before it is that, much like even Bill Murray movies, it tended to usually be about a guy who was kind of a general loser making better on his life and figuring it out somehow. Whereas Ferrell was a loser because he was stupid, and that was the entirety of the movie. He didn't necessarily improve. He just became more accepted.
Right. Absolutely. And I feel like Knocked Up is more in the vein of the Adam Sandler of it all, because Knocked Up, he does improve. He does read the baby books, which is a big part of that movie, which is, you know, you didn't read the baby book. So it does fall closer within that vein of those kind of movies of a man-child that improves in the moment. Whereas you're right, that, you know, Ron Burgundy at the end of the movie is not, I don't think he's any less of an out-of-touch misogynist as he was at the beginning. I just think he accepts his girlfriend. I think, yeah, I definitely... and by the way, that's not me criticizing the movie at all. It was built for him to be a misogynist. Like, that's built into the movie, that's who he is. That's not.
I think it's why it's somewhat classic is it's putting a face to the level of just how stupid the misogyny is.
Right, exactly. So yeah, that's not me trying to go woke and be like, oh, that movie, he's a misogynist. He was supposed to be a misogynist. That's the point. They have these whole discussions about a woman shouldn't be in the newsroom. There's so much irony in those statements. But yes, to your point, definitely. It definitely kind of, he's not that much wiser by the end of the film.
So let's go just a little bit deeper on the movie here, and I have some kind of background to discuss for anybody that's joined us to this point. I mean, we're talking about Superbad. Obviously, it's a fairly well-known film. If you're probably watching this, you've seen the film, but just for the general audience out here, cast for this one: director Greg Mottola, writers were Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. Lyle Workman did the music. Jonah Hill as Seth. Casey Margolis as the young Seth. Michael Cera as Evan, Christopher Mintz-Plasse as Fogel/McLovin, Seth Rogen as Officer Michaels, Bill Hader as Officer Slater, Kevin Corrigan as Mark, Joe Latrulio as Francis the driver, which I loved in the credits. It's just like one of the weirdest credits. But
there's a weirder credit. I don't know if you're going to get to it.
Okay. Martha McIsaac as Becca, Laura Morano as young Becca, Emma Stone as Jules, Aviva Farber as Nicola, Dave Franco as Greg, Laura Shea as Shirley, and Marcella Lentz Pope as Gabby. I probably missed
you
it.
left off my favorite credit of the movie, which is Carla Gallo as Period Blood Girl.
That's right. I did see that. Yes. And for a recognition of talent, a lot of these people have gone on to do a lot of other things. Obviously, Dave Franco has gone on to do much bigger things. Joe Latrulio was in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but he's been a character actor in a lot of comedies for a long time. So yeah, the eye for talent on this thing is extraordinary. But just some quick background on the movie. Obviously, we had talked about it earlier, but Superbad was released on August 17th, 2007 on a rough budget of 17.5 to 20 million. It would go on to gross 170.8 million worldwide. And as we mentioned, number 33 on the worldwide box office for the year. It was met with high critical reviews at the time, often comparing it favorably to many of the films it drew inspiration from, including Fast Times at Ridgemont High, American Graffiti, National Lampoon's Animal House, Dazed and Confused, and Revenge of the Nerds. Retrospectively, since its release, it has garnered acclaim as one of the best comedies of the 2000s and as one of the best high school movies of all time. It has been hailed as one of the defining movies of the millennial generation. It is possible to still get the t-shirts or posters with the Hawaiian ID for McLovin since the release of the film. The film was also listed at number 487 on Empire's 500 Greatest Films of All Time. The only list I think that I saw there it had appeared. It currently holds an 88% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 76 score on Metacritic, which is actually really good for a comedy, and a 3.9 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Quick plot summary for this. So I wrote this through ChatGPT in the voice of Seth Rogen. I don't know if I can do a good impersonation, but so there's this flick called Superbad, right? Imagine two high school seniors, Seth and Evan. They're like best buds, and of course, they're total outcasts. Anyway, they're on this mission to have the most epic night ever before they head off to college. The ultimate goal, to get booze and get the girls of their dreams. But let me tell you, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. Picture a wild odyssey that involves a fake ID, cops who are a bit too eager to party, and one awkward encounter after another. It's hilarious. It's awkward. It's got that coming of age vibe that makes it an absolute riot. Oh, and it's also got a bit of heart because, you know, it's not just about the party. It's about friendship, growing up, and all that other mushy stuff.
I don't know if Seth Rogen has ever said it's not just about the party, but
That's fair. But normally, this would be our section of the show that we like to entitle, Did You Know? So, are there any great little tidbits or facts without ruining the rest of your book? And obviously, we're trying to encourage people to buy it that you'd be willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much. One of my favorites that not a lot of people know about is, so when they were making the movie, one of the big things about movies, especially of that era, is they would have to be dubs for TV. You know, movies that come out now, like if a Netflix movie comes out, there's not going to be a dub for TV because the movie is the movie. You know, it's not going to air on network television, most likely, unless something... I don't think that's ever happened with a streaming movie outside of maybe a Peacock movie would go on NBC. But beyond that, so anyway, I went on a tangent, but What was I saying? Oh yeah. So there have to be dubs for movies, specifically of that era. So what Judd Apatow, which I thought it was the studio, Judd later copped to it that it was his idea, was what he decided to do was have them film after they locked in what they needed for the theatrical cut. They shot it again, replacing all the dirty words with clean words. A movie like 40-Year-Old Virgin or Knocked Up, that is a little more achievable in as much as there's maybe a curse every 30 seconds. Like it's there's still a lot of cursing in those movies, but it's not as apparent. It's not like Superbad where I can't remember what the count is, but it's a really high count of fucks in the movie. I'm allowed to curse, right?
Oh yeah.
All right, great.
That's why we say at the top it may have
right.
explicit language.
I noticed that. Yes, well, you can't talk about Superbad and not have a couple fucks in there. You have to, but
please feel comfortable to say whatever the fuck is on your mind.
Great. I have to get it out of my system now. I'm doing a TV news interview on Wednesday, so I have to be really careful. But anyway, yeah. So they would do a second take where they would redo the scene and make it completely clean. And the first scene they did was the soccer field scene, where he's setting up the movie, but he's going on long monologues of just saying a lot of really filthy stuff. So then he would have to, on the fly, they would be debating in a circle. They would debate, okay, what if you say, she looked me in the eyes and said, I want to party, or I want to party with you inside me. Those kind of things. So they would debate, can you say this? Can you say that? You know how much time that eats up? Like, instead of being focused on getting the best shots for your movie, you're like, okay, we have to keep going because we have to do it all over again. So they did that for about a week. They kept shooting the scenes, and then they would shoot them again. And not only are you, as a performer, acting, you have to act with the script in your head, and then on the fly, change each line. And in the case of Jonah Hill, that's really difficult with his character. Instead of him saying it looks like she could take a dick, which obviously that's not a great line in this day and age, but that is the line from the film. I think he says something like, looks like I don't think I could kiss her. What does he say? It looks like she gets filthy. That's what he says. It looks like she gets filthy. So
that's such a change.
It is. It changes everything. And so they did that for about a week, and then finally I think Judd said everybody collectively revolted. They just decided we're not doing it anymore, and I was shot down. But Judd was doing it not, his idea was trying to help them in the long run when they do ADR, when they go in and have to redub everything. He was trying to make that process easier, but at which it would work in most movies, but it's not going to work on Superbad because there's just too much cursing. Like, it just wasn't going to work. So that is a really interesting thing. I go really deep on in the book. And then the logistics is another thing. I don't think people realize the logistics of trying to get like the penis drawing scene done. It's a logistical nightmare. Because think about it. You've got kids that have to hold up pieces of paper with drawings of penises on them. Legal has to be involved. They have to Judd said he had to have so many meetings with lawyers trying to figure out what can they see, how can we shoot this. It was storyboarded within an inch of its life, trying to figure out how do we do this. And I want to make it clear, no child ever saw one of the drawings. Those drawings were kept in a manila envelope, safely away from all the kids. They were looking at other drawings, but no penises were in sight.
Even the penises were destroyed as a
exactly
filming of this film.
When you look at the film, you can see it. There's no real like over the shoulder shots where you can see like the face in it. It's all the hands, and it's it was an adult with childlike hands. Um, that's who was doing the drawing and holding the pieces of paper. So they had no idea, and they didn't tell them what they were reacting to. They just said, "You're looking at something really that you don't want to see." Like they were saying things like that. But that's an interesting tidbits in the book, all about that. The other logistical side of the sex scene with McLovin. McLovin was 17 when they made the movie, so his mom had to be on set. I mean, and so the studio was very specific about that too. There can't be thrusting. So they were so specific about what you can do and what you can't do. And it just, I mean, those stories are really fascinating into what the workaround is. So those are just a couple tidbits. Those are the dirtier tidbits, actually. I feel like I need to give one clean one just to cleanse the palate. What's another thing that's interesting? Well, this is something I really enjoyed. So we talked about Seth Rogen as a stand-up. He told me this when I interviewed him for the Vanity Fair oral history, which the book is kind of based on. What he would do to try out bits for Superbad is go on stage and try them out as a comedian in front of the audience. So a lot of the things that you see in the film had been tested in front of an audience when he was like 16, 17, 18 years old. So it's really interesting. I'm not familiar with that being the case for any other movies where it was written by a comic that would go on stage and I'm going to read you a little bit from what I'm writing for a movie, and then what works, what doesn't work, that goes in. So that was something that I learned that was really fascinating with this book.
It almost sounds like a reverse Seinfeld.
Yeah, it kind of was. Kind of was.
All right. So
yeah.
we'll jump into the next section just again to kind of
keep it moving. Yeah.
Yeah. With our show, we try to grade everything on what we call the Stanley rubric, which is our own creation of a point system to try and judge the greatness of individual films. We have 6 different categories, 5 of which we will require a score on: legacy, impact and significance, novelty, classicness, rewatchability. And I'll kind of go through these generally here to help inform you a little bit if the guest outline was not completely up to date. I tried to do my best, but the categories seem to change almost on like a weekly basis anymore as to what we're finding on some of these, which then begs the question of what really is the scoring system if we keep changing it. But
it's like whose line? The points don't matter.
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, I think roundabout we found a way to, for the most part, in my mind, come up with a better system for what greatness is as opposed to best. We've often discussed that the difference between what's a really good movie, which objectively I think most people can quantify what is a really good movie, like Citizen Kane or Casablanca or some of the other ones that are constantly up for this like best title, versus what is greatness, which I think has a combination of how it's impacted the world and how well it's received, how well it's remembered, that is outside of the quality itself of the movie. So let's start here with legacy. This is a measure of the legacy of the film roughly 5 years after it came out. So we're ignoring, at least temporarily, the initial 5 years that we had from roughly 2007 to 2011, 2012. And we're going to add those back in on the next category. But what is the legacy of the film from that point on till where we're at today? And we split this category 5 and 5 points between the legacy for the audience. So the general people out there, it can be movie fans, but we kind of take the audience as a wide perspective on that, and then felt among the industry itself. So, as I often ask, Dad, do you want to go first or second on this category?
I'm the old guy here, so go ahead and go first.
So, in an industry perspective on legacy, I think one of the ways in which we can tell this has a knock-on effect, and no pun intended there, is that many of the people that are in this movie went on to much bigger things. Obviously, we mentioned Emma Stone. This is, I believe, her first movie.
Her first
And
movie, Chris's first movie, yeah.
yeah, so
Michael Cera's first
we have
starring movie.
multiple Oscar nominees and at least one two-time Oscar winner in this entire movie that got their starts as a result of this movie. Obviously, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg have gone on to be great producers and writers of multiple different shows and content and movies and other things. So, from a legacy standpoint, just from them and what their impact on the industry generally is, I think this is actually a much bigger movie than people might at first glance give it credit for. And so, from that standpoint, I don't know if I'd quite give it the 5 because there are just a couple of movies that if like I compared it against maybe a Jaws where the impact is obviously legendary in and amongst itself for how it changed the industry, or Star Wars, or some of these other things. But it's up there. And by that standpoint, I'm going to go a 4.5 on that side of things. From a general audience perspective, this movie is not for everybody. I will say that because of the subject material, because of the genre, it is inaccessible for some people, but and I would probably say it's older people, not necessarily an engendered or a diversity quotient on that side of things. There is enough of a universality in the message of the film that I don't feel it's off-putting in a way that other raunchy films of the era would be primarily garnered towards one gender or age group specifically. And so from that standpoint, I'm going to go with 4. I have an 8.5.
Okay. For me, I understand all of your points, and I would agree with you on the industry, except for one thing, which is about 5 years after this is when the R-rated comedies started to fall off again. It started about that time frame, and now we're getting back to the point where you aren't going to find them. And then with Me Too, it's really struggled. Um, so I went with a 4 for the industry for that. I gave a half point down for you, but I agree with the public. Just the fact is you can use the term McLovin and people know about where it came from and what the reference was. You know, 15 years after the fact, 17 years, 18 years after the fact. So I'm at a 4 there, so I'm at an 8 overall.
All right. So do you feel you have enough background on the category, Andrew, to kind
Yeah.
of render a score?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the industry, I would say 4.5 as well with you, Thomas. I do feel like, well, that is definitely a very valid point in terms of the R-rated comedies as a whole. What I feel like the fact that we do keep seeing them working, and this is a point. You know what? I'll bring this up now, and then I'll bring it up again in one of the other categories. I was going to save it, but this does kind of fall in. I have to look. I'm going to butcher the title of this. Okay. There were 2 movies that came out in 2020, or there were 2 things that came out in 2023. One of which was nominated for an Oscar, and one was getting a lot of talk. The first one was Saltburn. Got a lot of talk. Nothing from the Academy, but it was kind of it was divisive in terms of how people felt about it. But that movie shows them watching Superbad. So they're watching a scene from Superbad in a movie that was very popular. Like the movie was, like I said, much talked about. To the point where there was debate over how it was done, like over, this came out, the movie takes place in June, but the film came out in August. That's how deep people went with it. And then there was a movie that was not a short film called Nine and Po. And
Yes.
it was a documentary short. I think you can find it on Disney Plus, and that came out, and that shows these 2 friends. It's a foreign film. It shows these 2 friends watching Superbad. So the fact that in 1 year alone, 2023, you had that in those two films, I think that's got to get the 0.5 right there, because the industry is accepted the film as kind of, I I don't know if I want to say cult classic yet, but definitely a very a movie that holds up, that is kind of teetering on future cult classic status. Audience, I would also say four. I would say four, for those reasons that yes, are some nature to the film that um, hasn't aged as great, but and by the way, I have to be fair to say that I did my thorough research for the book. I included both sides of that coin. I included, there was an article that came out that completely bashed the film in the Chicago Tribune. I have to include that. So I'm rambling. My apologies. I would say four as well. And also, my parents had my dad obviously saw it. My mom had not seen Superbad until I was writing the book. So I do feel like there are, and I know, Dana, you mentioned you had not seen it all the way through. So I definitely think there are still people that hadn't, that you just knew about it but haven't watched it for various reasons. Or there's someone that's a little more sensitive with language, maybe they won't make it all the way to the end to get to the message. So that's also a possibility. So I would say four for that. 4.5 and 4.
Did Gene Siskel write that for the Tribune?
No, oh no! All right, I'll say
Wasn't
what
Gene
the
Siskel
article
dead?
was. What was the article?
2007?
No. This was a think piece.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
How? Let me. What is it? I'll say what it was. It was how Superbad, how teen comedies like Superbad normalize sexual assault.
Oh, yes, I do remember that
That's
part from your from the
book.
book.
I have to address, because normally I wouldn't address the think piece like that, but it's such a bold statement. It's not like how it normalizes misogyny. That's one thing. How it normalizes sexual assault is way different than the assault part of it. I'm like, okay, like how does this person feel like that? Why does this person feel like it? I'm writing a whole book about a Superbad movie I love. I do have to try to understand the other side. So.
I'm going to be right up front on this, which is that there's a definite problem with pieces like that do not take into account the cultural norms at the time. When I was in high school, it was not uncommon for a senior to be dating a freshman.
No.
And now, boy, would you get just absolutely destroyed.
Well, let's save some of that for classicness.
Yes.
We've got impact and significance coming up. So, as I mentioned before, this is the 5 years after it came out. So, roughly about 2007 to 2011, 12, somewhere in that range. What is the impact and significance of this movie, both felt by the industry and the audience? We again split this category 5 and 5 points between the various two groups. And I will say, in many of the same ways that it is impactful for legacy, it is impact and significance for overall most of the people in this movie. I think within 5 years after this movie came out, Jonah Hill is getting nominated, I think, for Moneyball.
Yep.
Right.
And so he's, in a very short span of time, gone on to being a fairly significant or recognizable actor. Let alone that Emma Stone was leading her own films by that point as well. And Seth Rogen, obviously Bill Hader was still on SNL, I think, at that point. I don't think he'd quite left. But
no.
All of these people had started to formulate what they were going to be, and you had relationships with them as a result of this movie. And Rogen and Evan Goldberg had already started to do some of their other stuff. It hadn't quite developed into being The Boys or some other things that are favorites yet. But as a result of this, I still have to grade this almost in the same way that I did Legacy for the most part. I would say that I'm going to give it a 4 for the industry, because I don't think it's quite developed to the point where it's the 4.5 that we get a little later down the line, where they've all done more significant things. But I can't discount it either. I'll just take kind of that half point. But the other part of this is in the way that the audience reacted in the moment that it was. I remember this just being everywhere, culturally pervasive in a way that I don't remember a ton of the other movies quite having such a ripple effect. That it was being quoted from, as far as my memory, middle schoolers at the time that I was exposed to, all the way up to the college kids that I kind of generally knew. Now, does that have an impact among everybody in the general audience? No. But was this a movie that just about everybody who lived in a theater in 2007 saw, even despite it being number 33? More than likely. And so from that standpoint, I'm going to go a 4.5 there. I also have an 8.5.
Okay, for me, industry. This cemented Apatow as being, basically whatever you want to do. Here's the money.
Comedy Godfather.
Yep. And so to that extent, he went on a run then, eventually getting more into more mainstream or more serious films, I guess. But still, that in and of itself gives it a 0.5 boost for me for industry from what my legacy was. Simply because that in that period, that in that 5 years, he was king. So I went with a 4.5 there. Public. Here's my little different take. This film is a comet. Okay. It burned bright within a certain sector of the public, those under 30. But the tail lasted for a long time. As so the kids behind there would then catch up on the movie and follow it and become popular. And I think then, as a result of the fact that it had this legacy, it became more known and popular to an older group of people. Because, I mean, at the time, I would have been, about 45 or so, 40, late 40s. And the only reason I was familiar with the film was because you were watching it. I don't remember it being coming out. I didn't pay close attention to it in the marketing or the trailers or anything. So I think that that's a little bit less. So I'm going to go for the public with a 3.5 simply because I don't think it had the appeal to the over 40 group that it did to the under 40 group. And within that 5 years. So I'm still coming out at the same point, which is my 8.
So I would say I would agree with the 4 point. I can't remember times if you said 4.5 for industry, but I would say 4.5 for industry because of that run that Apatow and everyone else went on. Like it seemed absolutely in 2008, the immediate aftermath into 2009, it seemed unstoppable. And then even a movie like, even post Funny People, there were still other movies coming out. Like if you look in the aftermath would be 5 years. So that would be up until what year? 2011,
12.
So everybody was still making movies that had cultural significance. So within the industry, Jonah Hill, you mentioned that Moneyball, Emma Stone had The Help.
True.
So, they were well on their rises to, within kind of the Academy side of things. Did I lose you?
Nope.
Oh, perfect. I froze. The screen froze, but perfect. If you can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
So they were rising in terms of the Academy. And then also everyone, even Christopher Mintz-Plasse the next year had Role Models. That was a movie that did very well within certain sectors. So yeah, I would say 4.5 for the industry, and then the audience, I would also say a 4.5 in the aftermath, because in the immediate aftermath, because it was something that just I remember being in high school, and let's say a movie like Borat.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
Well, I guess we got to fill some space here. This is the difficulties of going live.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, let's assume. All right. I'll just finish up the category based on the scores that he had indicated he'd be at a 9. So that would put us at an 8.5 average between the three of us.
Like, but in terms of Superbad, especially the Superbad, like they were still quoting Anchorman 3 or 4 years later. That was still a movie that people loved and talked about in a way that I wasn't getting as much with the Borat or any of those. It was kind of in a category with that and also Team America. Those were movies that people were still watching over and over again in those coming years. So I would give that a 4.5 as well. But then that's just from my perspective, what I had witnessed. Perhaps, an older crowd wasn't watching it as much. Wasn't the awareness wasn't as much there, but I still feel like there was a marketability because of how big the Apatow movies were at that point. Like they were huge. Like people were catching them on TV, so there was definitely a familiarity. I think. I mean, Seth Rogen, Emma Stone, Jonah Hill all became big stars within that 5-year period. Especially with Spider-Man. When she did Spider-Man, I mean, that gave her real mainstream appeal. So,
Yep.
So
there you go.
I know that you didn't hear it before, but that your 9 combined there for the category would give us an 8.5 average between the three of us.
Oh,
So
did I freeze completely?
yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, I kept talking. I had
You-
no fucking clue. I was still making my point. Damn it.
Well, it
Okay.
happens. I
Anyway,
mean, this is kind
9.
of the experiment of doing this whole live thing.
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
it's
Perfect.
fine.
But all right, so let's move to novelty then. And now this is a category that has taken on a different feel over time. We used to just simply do it on the novelty of the film. We have, in probably about the last year, really started to experiment, also splitting this category between the originality of the concept, be it the story, be it the production, the artistry, the direction, etc., of what happened with these films, and then how well they executed on the originality that they were trying to convey. And that might be even a general execution score on how well the movie is executed, just from an acting, storytelling, cinematography standpoint. And so this category has now been divided 5 and 5 between the two of these for a total of 10. I'll start again here just to kind of ease up and get us back into the category. But I don't know if I would say this is original per se. Like, I don't think it's unoriginal, but it's trading off of a lot of movies that came before it. And it speaks to a lot of its predecessors in advance of it. It very much, in some ways, feels like an American Graffiti. Everything is all in one night. People are leaving after high school, kind of thing. And so it feels familiar. I think that's part of the reason why the film does work, is that it feels somewhat familiar, and it's this generation's take on it. So whether you want to say it's American Graffiti or Dazed and Confused, about every generation we have one of these movies, these coming of age kind of tales that's not necessarily always all in one night, but very kind of a closed loop, all in one day kind of situation film of people who are at the juncture between adolescence and adulthood. And by that standpoint, I don't want to discount the movie completely, because I do think there are things that feel very original to people who watched it at the time, but I'm going to give that a 3. But the execution, I think, is what makes this movie connect with people over time and has stayed with people. The comedy is excellent. The storytelling, again, I think the heart and the depth to this film compared to some other Apatow films, I think is a little bit more palatable, at least for me, especially with the way it ends, which for some people, I know it doesn't always land well, but it could. So from that standpoint, I have a 3 and I have a 4 on the execution. I have a 7.
Okay, for me, I'm gonna give it a. I originally was thinking about this, and then I thought, as I'm trying to thinking through the whole book or the whole movie and such, and then I'm reading your book, Andrew, and the very end, and I started thinking about the closing. That in and of itself is worth a half a point up because even though it is a coming of the age film in the high school, the fact that it's really the relationship, the bromance at the end that takes it in a little bit different direction than any other. So I'm going to go with a 3.5 for the novelty. And as far as the execution, I think it deserves at least a 4 simply by casting.
That's a good point.
Because the fact of who they considered and how and whatever was involved in making these final determinations, boy, did they hit a sweet spot when they finished this. um, some of the people they were considering, I would have a hard time visioning them in those roles. um, so it's obvious that they had a good clear um, idea and concept. And uh, I thought the editing and the direction itself were both very uh, excellent because there isn't a point in the film that it really drags. What tends to happen a lot of times is they throw things in, they think it's going to be funny or whatever, and it doesn't really fit. The only one scene that doesn't really advance the story, as you said in your book, was the dick pics. But that was in because it just was too funny to leave out.
Right. Greg Matola made sure of it.
Yeah. So I'm going with a 4 and a 3.5. So I'm at a 7.5 on novelty.
You're not going to knock it for all the dick drawings, the dick drawing treasure chest?
A novelty?
No. I suppose. We have a long conversation coming up on classicness.
Yeah.
Yes. So, all right. I might have to stop and get a reminder of the 3, but so the first one in terms of originality, right? That's the first one?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go for, and this is why, because yes, there's definitely, it's not original in terms of the plot as far as it's a high school movie about two guys trying, it's a mission movie. Superbad is a mission movie. There's been a lot of those over the years. And a lot, movies about teenagers talking. That's not original. But as I do talk about in the book, the difference is the motivation. A movie like American Pie, the motivation is different. They are 4 guys that want to get laid, period. They don't care who it's to. Superbad, it's about the dream girls, and of course, that's just the plot. The story is their friendship and their connection with each other, which is new. That I hadn't seen. The other reason that really pushed me to give it a 4 is the Fogel character. Again, this is something I do touch on in the book, which is, I think it was Greg Matola told me, Fogel thinks he is Dean Martin, not Jerry Lewis. It is the first time we've seen that archetype character where it's the nerd character. Fogel is the nerd. There's no way about it. That's how he's supposed to be. He's fighting against it because he doesn't see himself as a nerd. The rest of the world does. He thinks he's the coolest guy in the room. He's hip. And we have not seen that from a nerd character that's not pathetic. Fogel is not a pathetic character. He is the only one that's completely secure in who he is. And by the way, he's the only guy that has sex in the movie.
True.
So that nerd character is a really different take. I've never seen that take before, where the nerd actually, isn't pining to be accepted. As far as he is concerned, he's accepted. That's why I'm going to give that a 4. All right, the next one, remind me, please.
Execution.
Execution. That one I am going to go 4.5. And the reason why is because, again, it's casting. Casting's a big part of it. And I would actually say, yeah, I think it's the casting. And I think it's just the way in which they were able to... It was a movie that they struggled for so many years to get made. Everyone wanted it to be PG-13. So they had to get everything just right, and I feel like they delivered. I feel like the fact that we're talking about it, the fact that there's a book about it, I feel like all those things leads me to believe, yes, execution was, pretty spot on. So I'm going to go 4.5 there. I'm going to go 4 for the last one. Oh, what's the last one? Is that editing?
No, so we're good as far as the category goes now.
Got it. I'm so sorry. I thought there was a third one.
Oh no, it's all right. I know that if you're not used to it, if you haven't been on the show before,
right,
it can get a little unusual. But so, did you catch my co-host number? Because I missed his before he had to unceremoniously take a short break for himself.
No worries. 4. The first one was a 0.5 up from you. So what was that?
That was a 3.5 then.
So he was 3.5.
If you didn't catch it, it's all right. We'll ask him when he comes back.
Okay.
I guess we can kind of generally get started on the classicness conversation.
Yes, there's going to be a lot.
He has some more specific questions that he would like to ask. One of the things that we're about to introduce in our most recent episode that we recorded this last Wednesday, it's releasing this upcoming Wednesday. We usually record 1 week in advance to give me time for actual editing, as opposed to these live streams, which this has been a fun yet kind of unusual experience.
Yes.
But we kind of introduced the concept, because we've been playing around with this category so much lately, of... We've often given points down, and this is why we start from a higher baseline. Then we usually give points up because of how well or not something has aged. And from that standpoint, a lot of comedies age just terribly, because over time the priorities and the humor and etc. have changed. Now,
especially high school movies.
Yes. Now, I think in a way, this movie hasn't aged that poorly for me on a humor standpoint. Like, I still laugh at this movie quite a lot. But I think it because of the time and when I saw it and the time that is kind of stuck in my brain, my association goes back to the first time that I saw it in some ways. And so maybe I'm just a little bit jaded for how I see this movie. Because if you presented it to somebody completely new out of the blue, are they going to laugh at this? I'm not so certain, because our attitudes towards comedy have changed, which is why there are not a lot of comedies being made right now, or at least like straight comedies in this fashion. But that being said, the way this movie is presented, and we've talked about it kind of ad nauseum already, it's got so much extra depth and layering to it. And because there isn't just this generally inserted TNA that there are in a lot of other comedies of the era.
It's not
going for the shock effect of the just general nudity or having characters that are sex objects, really. I think these, like, I wouldn't say Emma Stone is like classically gorgeous, drop dead hot necessarily in the way that we would oversex several other characters from other movies. But similarly, I would say that both of the girls to me feel much more realistic to what high school girls actually would be like. And by that standpoint, and because there isn't really the sex to it or the over sexualized nature to it, and I'm not sure I agree with the nature of this sexual assault per se, then I actually think this ages pretty well in a way that many other comedies of this era I don't think would, because again, the characters feel more realistic to what they're portraying, and a more realistic portrayal of high schoolers and how they talk, how they what they prioritize in their life. And they're not necessarily infantilized adults who are just generally losers trying to grow out of that and maybe grow up. This is actually telling of a experience that I think is more universal. But before we get too much further on classicness, Dad, now that you've been able to kind of come back in, I missed your number for novelty, and I want to give a final score so we can officially
Oh,
move on from that
sure.
category.
I had 3.4 and or 3.5 and 4 for 7.5.
Okay. So I'll do some quick math here for just a second. I believe we have 14 and 9, 23, 7.67 average between us three for that category. So we kind of just bridged generally for what you've missed to this point on classicness. And we're kind of doing a lay down version of where
Sure.
we think the category may or may not be at. Again, this category in many ways has no true definition. We've looked at it from a
Yeah.
humor standpoint, we've looked at it for a cultural priorities standpoint, we've looked at it for many different things over time. I don't think this movie in any way is unwatchable. I don't think it is aged poorly. I don't know if it was ahead of its time, which is one of the rare areas where I would add points, or that it necessarily is old enough to say that you could re-release it uncensored or unchanged, and that might give some additional points. But I'm gonna go with yeah, I'm gonna go with a 7, which used to be our baseline. Currently, our baseline has changed to a 6, but I think a 7 is fairly warranted. There are a couple of things that I will throw out just as much as anything as to maybe spots where this is aged. The initial conversation about pornography really dated to about 2007, because pornography has significantly changed with the entrance of OnlyFans and not needing a third party to be the between you and your audience and making a name for yourself with this stuff. Fake IDs, while they're still there, I don't think they're as prevalent. And the drug of choice to teens anymore, I don't think is nearly alcohol in the way that it was in 2007. I think they're taking other drugs much more prevalently. Marijuana, Adderall is a big one. And then some other stuff that is explored on Euphoria but won't be explored here. So I think those are a couple of spots where this movie has aged a little bit. But again, I'm at a 7. So if I'll open up the floor and how we want to kind of maybe tiptoe around this subject a little bit.
Well, let me just throw this out. Okay. Andrew, in chapter 13, A New Generation, you discuss the changing attitudes a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And as a child of the 1970s and early 80s, your comments about Revenge of the Nerds is something that I really have thought about a lot, because the scene of voyeurism and the masked sexual assault um, were hilarious when I was that age, and they were out. In retrospect, they are not appropriate at all, and how these things tend to change. Um, the one thing I will say about this, and again, could Superbad be made now? Let me just put this in comparison. Promising Young Woman, where she's luring guys in by pretending to be drunk, and they're trying to um, pick her up because she's drunk.
Mhm.
We have Evan refusing to get involved with his dream girl because she is drunk.
Yes.
And we have Seth only getting together with her because he thought they were both going to be drunk. Which, okay, it's not the best, but there's a little more moral attitude towards alcohol and sex in this film than most films of this era or previous eras. So I, not to mention the fact that the the probably as strong of characters are the two female leads as any in the film. Uh, so I think I'm gonna go with your 7, Tom.
Okay.
I had been waffling around and I thought about giving a couple of points down with the whole because the cops.
I wondered if you would bring that up because
Yeah.
it's one place that we haven't really explored a ton
Right.
of. But to me, that's not only is it the secondary plot, but it's actually the flip side of the entire movie where these guys are being forced to grow up and are reluctantly kind of pushing themselves towards that. And it is somewhat of a breakup movie. But you also see the consequences of not growing up by being these cops.
Uh, well, and I will point out I thought about it, okay, and especially in the whole um uh back the badge movement and then this other side of it and such. And really, I've known a lot of cops in my life. I've known them professionally, I've known them personally.
Same.
These guys are a little over the top, but for the most part, they're not that far removed from a lot of cops.
Mhm.
And
In
that's why
attitude and personality, but I don't know if I would project that most cops are going to be holding fraudulent confessions to cover up their own behavior. I am not making that claim in a public forum, Dad.
Okay, all right. But I mean, I just tell the story. If you're talking about growing up or the need to grow up, I could go back to the fact that I think it's now done away with, but there used to be a bar association or county bar association with multiple counties that they had a weekend, long weekend, and they would go out and it would be all the cops, all the sheriffs, all the lawyers, and they would blow or just shoot road signs. They would drag race because who's going to arrest them? The judges are there, the lawyers are there, the prosecutors, the cops, everybody's doing it, and it was just a raucous thing. It was so yeah. I don't think that's. I did not feel I needed to give points down for that.
All right, so we have 2 7s on the board. I'm sure, Andrew, you have much more nuanced feelings about this, given the depth with which you've covered this book.
Yeah, I did a lot of research, and that Chicago Tribune article when I found it, that was Pandora's box for me. That was basically okay. I knew this was here in the back of my mind. As I was writing it, I don't write in um, chronological order. I kind of split up by chapters. I'll start with chapter 5. Then that's kind of how I write. With this, I'm like, when I got that, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I have to address this. So what I did is I texted a friend of mine. I've known them for many years. They are part of the CAM. They are part of and they wouldn't mind me saying this. They've given me permission. They're part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I'm like, and I asked, will you sit down and watch it with me? Because they told me they saw it once and don't remember it. They don't really have a strong connection with it. So in your point of watching it was so, like, yes, I'm very biased. I had a great experience and I'm writing a book. Yes, I am biased. I need to see it with someone that's not, that, will call out, this is wrong, this is wrong. So I sat with them, and the scene I really wanted to know is the soccer field scene, where he's like, oh, the girls, where it's like, oh, I was so gone. I so shit-faced last night. I shouldn't have slept with that guy. We can be that mistake. That line, I'm like, I need to know what they think. Because that's the line that could be troublesome. And got to the end of the scene, and they went, I have no problem with that. And I said, really? Yes, because it's the character. It's what the character believes. And as Greg Mottola pointed out, he has no interest in perfect characters. Seth is supposed to be a flawed character. He's not supposed to be the voice of morality in the film. And he's not a bully. In the scene where he gets spit on, that proves he's not the bully because he doesn't stand up. He is just an obnoxious, scared kid that's making up for his own insecurities by having a loud mouth. So that's how I take this character, Seth. The only issue that my friend brought up was with the whole film was the few moments when it did sexualize teenagers. Like the shot of Becca's breasts a couple times, even though she is clothed. Sexualizing the idea of a teenager, that was the only time when my friend's like, that doesn't seem okay. But that was very important to me in writing this book. I needed a perspective that's not the straight white male perspective. So they were very helpful. And in terms of the book itself, like I spoke with Judd and I spoke with Judd Apatow, Greg Mottola. I spoke with them about the character Seth, and their feelings were obviously the film would be made a little bit differently today. That being said, the character of Seth doesn't have malice in him. And it's Jonah's casting that helped justify Seth, because Jonah has a deer in the headlights look to him. He isn't someone that's trying to hurt anybody. He's just someone that doesn't know better because he believes he's been so consumed with TV and films and how women are overly sexualized in those. So that's part of it. And Evan in the scene with Becca in the bedroom, he can't do it. He cannot violate her. My feeling is that Seth gets the alcohol not to take advantage of Jules, but because he believes the only way she could ever be interested in him is if she is drunk, which I do think are two different things. I don't think he's trying to sexually assault her in any way by doing that. That's not that character. I disagree with the sexual assault accusation. I feel like it is just trying to get everybody's inhibitions down. And and by the way, he learns his lesson the next day that he didn't need that in order to be liked. He learns from that misguided approach. The approach, even though it's different, it's still misguided. And I like that they go on a mission throughout the entire movie. A 2-hour movie. Their whole mission, we got to get alcohol. They get there. Becca is already drunk. She didn't need more alcohol from them. She was already drunk when he arrived. That was pointless. Jules doesn't drink. That was pointless. They didn't need to be the booze fairy. The whole movie was about, we need to get it. We promise we need to get it. But alcohol is already at the party when they get there. So I think that's interesting. I think that's an interesting part that I don't know if they intended the morality of that, but it's there. And then the cops. All I'm going to say is I agree with you, Dana. I think there's some realism there. They went on a ride-along. Seth and Bill Hader went on a ride-along and watched this cop spend 45 minutes just harassing the public. Just this random cop harassing the public, like yelling at people and turning on the lights to get the red light, doing all this shit that they do in the movie. And so Seth said, any concerns we had about the characters being unbelievable completely went out the window. Because, yes, they are over the top, but there are cops like that. And I've known a couple, and I've seen them. I remember at one point, I'll be like, this is so minimal compared to what the cops in the movie do, but being in the back seat in Chicago, out of their jurisdiction, they're off duty, we're in a regular civilian car, and they, go right on a no right on red. They just do it anyway. Small, tiny thing, but that basically shows if they get pulled over, I'm a cop. So yeah, that's believable. And, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of waffling. I've been waffling between 7.5 and an 8. Because there are I got to bring it up. The homophobic slurs, not acceptable. The slurs, absolutely not acceptable. Immediately knock off. I can't go beyond an 8 for me for that, because it has to be removed 2 points for not just that, but that's a big thing. Because that being said, that was, as you and I talked, Thomas, that was in high school at the time. That was in the halls. Everything was no homo, and just, you're so gay, dude. That was it.
Yep.
And it got worse than that.
Yep.
So it being in the movie is not okay, but it is accurate. It's painfully accurate. If you made this movie today, it absolutely would not be in there. But that does not... It's not acceptable. Seth Rogen has said language is not acceptable. Those couple words are the only thing that... Those couple words are not the only thing, but definitely play a part in it. 7.5. And it's hard because I wrote a whole book about how much I love this movie. But yeah, I've been waffling 7.5 or 8 because it's those things are there. Yeah, and it's the words. You know what? I'm going to go 8 because I feel like the good outweighs the bad, although the bad is bad.
You talk about the cops. I just was going to add this little analogy. When I was young, I knew a cop, and he kept a card in his wallet, and it said, "You have the right to remain silent. Now, ma'am, just unbutton your blouse and do what the nice officer says."
Oh my fucking God.
Oh my God. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's accurate.
So the score on this is a 7.33 average between the three of us. But I will say, regarding your last couple of points there on the language and such, what we did in this last episode that hasn't released yet is talk about maybe creating a better test to resolve some of these morally gray areas where the language is accurate to the period in which it was made, but it's either intentionally malicious or it's negligently malicious. And in this case, I wouldn't say it's intentionally malicious. I don't think in any way this movie is homophobic per se, but what it is potentially negligently malicious by including it and not having to include it.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't need to be in there. This is a point that a movie that came out a couple years ago, I think it was Bros, made this point. The Hangover came out. The trailer for The Hangover, and I know it's a movie you guys have covered before. I'm not going to say it, but it was paging Dr. Homophobic Slur.
Yeah.
And that's in the trailer. That came out 2 years after Superbad. That was the time. It was still acceptable. It shouldn't have been. It's reprehensible, but it was acceptable.
Wasn't it 34 states still had constitutional amendments against it? I mean, the watershed moments in this came 2010, and then by 2012, it's like a complete role reversal as to what the public sentiment was. And it just...
Absolutely.
It is the quickest moving social feeling that I can remember in my lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, and if you look at 21 Jump Street, by the way, I think with Jonah Hill, that's a great example. But not a lot of time. 2005, when they were in high school, to 2012, 7 years, they go in, everything has changed. I think that movie actually paints a really interesting social kind of picture about high school, because that's exactly what it was. By the time I graduated in 2011, you weren't hearing those slurs anymore. In those 4 years, things changed, and for the better, but they were there, and that's why I've been waffling. I'm still waffling. Should it be 7.5? Should it not?
We have it sitting kind of written down in stone at this point, so we're just gonna leave it.
Let's leave it at 8.
Let's move to rewatchability. This will be a much easier category
cool.
for you to do. Because
wow, that took a lot out of me.
That category is very difficult. And for the people that have done it 200 and I guess this will be 250 times, it becomes increasingly more difficult based on like fan reaction and guests that we've had on and in different sentiments. It's never tough, or it's never easy, excuse me.
Right.
But let's move to the rewatchability and kind of close this loop here by allowing you to go first. I think you have a fairly high subjective score for rewatchability. You do not need to be objective on this. This is kind of a highly subjective category where many people have submitted different tests as to what rewatchability means to them. So in lieu of our influence on you for what this category may mean to us, where do you have this 1 out of 10 scoring on rewatchability?
I'm gonna have to, I would say, again, I think it's really tough. It is so tough for me to say. I'm trying to think not in how I feel now. I'm trying to think how I felt 4 years ago before I ever wrote the oral history. Okay. Because I'm too biased. I know the people that have made the movie. I know how the sausage is made. 4 years ago, I was just a fan. I had no connection to Superbad, 1 iota. Except that I am biased, always will be, because I saw it with my dad and my grandfather. And I was there, and I've always said it was the best screening. If the movie comes on cable, when I had cable, it was one of those rare movies, not rare, but it was one of those movies where you have to drop everything and just watch it. It's up there. Another one like that with me is The Birdcage. Same thing. Just like I have to watch that movie if it's on cable. It just makes me laugh so much. Superbad, same. I'm going to give it an 8 for rewatch. You know what? I am so biased. I'm going to go really high with this one. I'm going to go 9 because, and just please bear in mind, I am biased. It's tough for me not to be.
It's quite all right. We've had people that have come on to discuss their favorite movie and they give it a 10. So it's whatever you want to make of it in this.
I might even go 9.5 because I can't think of rewatchability. I can't think of anything I would take away from it. All right, I'll take the 0.5 away from it just because I've seen it so many times now. If I'm flipping through Netflix, it's not going to be the first movie I watch because I've seen it so much and I just wrote a book about it. I haven't watched High Fidelity in the years since I wrote the book. I tried a year ago when I did a Q&A with it, and I couldn't do it because I had spent so much damn time watching that movie. Same thing with Superbad. 9.5, 0.5 away because I've watched it too many times.
All right, Dad, you're the newest full exposure to the movie. I'll let you go before I try and add what I think is a more objective.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm so biased. It's hard.
It's quite all right.
Fine. Okay,
this category invites that, so
yes.
It's
so
fun.
I have these rings that I basically kind of think about. Like,
is that how we measure your age? Like a tree?
Sure. There's like a group of about 5 or 6 films that I watch at least every year. I'll just put them on and watch them for no
Right.
apparent reason. And then I have another group of films that I will like to watch maybe once a year, maybe every other year. And then there's a group of films that I will watch every other year or every 2 years. And then I have a group of films that if it's on, I'll watch it. If somebody has, or we start talking about a film and it comes up and I go, hey, have you seen it or do you want to watch it? I mean, we could watch. Okay, I'm putting that in this or that or this film in that category. Okay. Having watched it now and read your book and understood a lot more about it and where it was coming from, I think this film is one that I'll probably every 3-4 years watch on my own. But if somebody else wants to watch it, or I come across it, or I have the smart TV, so all of my apps they'll put something up that's on one of the streaming services on a header, or on one of the uh, free channels, and so I may click on it. So I'm at a 6.
Okay, that's fairly reasonable. I think this is an easy background watch, especially if you've seen the movie a number of times. I don't think that there's anything that's all that terribly complicated about the movie. And from that standpoint, I guess I'm trying to formulate exactly what I want to say with this. On an objective standpoint, it's not a long movie. I think it's like almost right at 2 hours, which no movie, excuse me, to quote Roger Ebert again, or maybe even paraphrase, no good movie is ever long enough and no bad movie is ever short enough. This, though, hits at a pretty good sweet spot because even good movies, I think, to an extent, anything over 2 hours anymore is getting to test my patience a little bit. This trend towards every movie's got to be 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 15 minutes. I mean, wasn't it like the almost every single Oscar nominee this year is like 2 hours and 20 minutes? It's absurd. Cut 20 minutes out of your movie. There are very few films where cutting 20 minutes out of the movie is not going to. Anyway, we'll save that for next weekend when we do the live stream for that. But I will say, the comedy is still, at least to me, pretty funny. And I don't think we're terribly removed from this era. I think that this is somewhat universal in the comedy that it's covering. So it doesn't age as poorly in some regards to that. I don't think that, even though we're more sensitive to some of this stuff, that we're too far removed to make this problematic on that front. And so from an objective standpoint, I have it at an 8. I do think there are a lot of people that could easily watch this and enjoy it without having to think all that much about it, and that would be troubled by it. Maybe that's just me, and maybe it is a subjective 8 somehow. I'm trying to apply some more objective standards, but I guess we'll find out. So, we also have a 7.67 on that category. And that leaves us for me to do the final math here. I will say audience score on this one, we had an 88% for Google users and an 87% for Rotten Tomato users for an 8.75. So if you two fine gentlemen don't mind stalling, because normally during the show, I would cut this part out where I have to do all the math, but I can't do that on a live stream.
Okay.
So
what I can say is, and I'm sure it definitely, like, my numbers do skew higher, and I think the reason might be because, I don't know, do you guys have a lot of people that have written books about their favorite movie they're talking about on? Is that kind of different? Kind of.
No, yeah, you're the first time we've had the author
Got
of
it.
a book per
About
That's
se.
not
that
true.
We
movie.
That is
yeah,
not true. We
yeah,
had
that's it.
somebody that did The Room, and we had
Yes,
them on. It was a book of essays that they'd combined
Right.
yes,
about
Okay.
The Room. But that's the
and
only
we've
other time
had a
we've had a
producer,
author who
and
wrote the book about what we're discussing.
yes, we've had the had a few, producer or two. We've had a couple of directors,
Okay.
but for the most part, no. But mostly it's people who are just
Fans of the
other
movie.
fans or podcasters and such, and the whatever. So, but yeah, it varies, and we have different thoughts and whatever. We're trying to always add something else to Tom and I because father and son, two white guys from the Midwest, our opinions are not that far apart on a
You
lot
had
of
to add a
things.
third white guy from the Midwest. I see what you did there.
Yeah, but
I might
still,
live in LA now, but my Midwest roots, 28 years in Illinois.
yeah.
I get it.
All right.
So,
So,
and I mean, for example, we're going to be doing our Oscar show. I can't get anywhere close to seeing um, uh, the Brutalist because it's nowhere close to me.
Really?
It's a 2 hour drive to get to a showing of it at least. Um, so
We
you
are
know,
very, yeah. We're moments hearing that, it's like, man, I forget how fortunate we are out here sometimes. Like, that movie is,
now
that's never, yeah.
if they would have put a car chase in it or
Right.
some big nude scenes, then maybe it would have been my local theater. But
I couldn't
uh,
believe I got to see Parasite living in the suburbs like 5 years ago. Like I was able to go to Lincolnshire, Illinois, to see Parasite. That was, we're talking about, that was and that was pre-Oscars. That was a South Korean movie with subtitles and three
yeah,
hours long, like in a family drama, like that. Not
yeah,
exactly, commercial, mainstay.
yeah, I know.
so let's wrap up the final score on this movie. So to repeat the categories, we had an 8.33 for legacy, an 8.5 for impact and significance, a 7.67 for novelty, a 7.33 for classicness, a 7.67 for rewatchability, and an 8.75 for audience score, giving us a final total of 48.25 and currently placing it on our grand list that is now, I think, 226 long. It would be number 84 between The Social Network at 83 and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre at 85.
Perfect.
So an interesting placement, certainly.
Yeah,
I can see it with the social. I can see it in between the Social Network because again, it is that thing of, it's an outcast movie, and the
yeah.
Social Network wasn't. He's definitely an outcast before all the shit happens.
Yeah.
So, as usual, if you're either watching the live stream or that you have comments for us later, you can certainly write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of our socials at Gmote Podcast on all of the major, I believe, social platforms, except I have yet to sign up for Blue Sky, which I keep meaning to do and just keep forgetting due to the course of whatever else is going on. But
Right.
and you can certainly contact us on the website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/@Gmote Podcast. All right. Now, this is the segment of the show we usually reserve for some remaining questions, and I do have some that are generally either unanswerable questions about the film or some things that are left open ended. Maybe we have a few more questions for Andrew, but if you do have a question that you can pose in the chat for those of you that are watching live with us, you can certainly do so right now. But we will take questions and hopefully wrap this up. I guess my first one, do Seth and Evan remain friends after high school? If you're assuming that it's about the writers of the movie, then the answer is obviously yes. But I'm not sure. I think that the way that the film kind of leaves it open ended, and when you go off to different high school, or excuse me, to different colleges, it can be hard to maintain relationships over time. I think the only way in which male friendships from like high school seem to be maintained anymore are fantasy football leagues, which is kind of my situation.
um, I would say they do, and they do. It's never going to be in the way that they were. It's just, I mean, 4 years apart, you have so many different experiences. You're gonna meet someone new, you know, fall in love with someone new. Just because they wind up with the dream girls at the end of the movie, that's not. You're not gonna marry them. I mean, I would. I mean, a summer fling. Maybe it turns into a year-long distance. I mean, either way. I'm trying to remember. I think Becca is going to the same school as Evan.
I don't think it ever says.
No, oh, they just mentioned a comforter for college. They don't say what college. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, I feel like with Seth and Evan, I feel like they would still be friends. I don't think that friendship's ever going. I don't think see them ever having a severe falling out. Will it be as strong as it was? No, but even in Superbad, we see it's not. It gets a little rocky a couple times, but they love each other. I think they're always going to love each other. I don't think that's going to change, especially after that journey they had, that one cool journey they had that one night. I mean, they're always going to have that affection for each other as friends. So, yes, they do remain friends. How close is, tough to tell, but yes, they're definitely still friends.
How long are Evan and Fogel roommates before they kill each other?
Well,
knowing some of the people I went to high school with, and if you were not like immediately tight, and even if you were, like I lived with my best friend from high school for approximately 8 weeks, and we didn't kill each other, but I think he got fed up with me very quickly.
I don't see Fogel killing Evan. I actually see Fogel thriving in college because if that night with the confidence that boosts his confidence. The Fogel at the end of the movie is not the Fogel at the beginning of the movie. He's got the McLovin persona. He's going to follow through with McLovin. That's not the end of McLovin. I think he'd be kind of popular in college and find some success. So, I would say that Evan is also less. He's more patient than Seth. If it was Seth and Fogel, I give it a week. But I don't think they would kill each other. I don't see it lasting all 4 years of college. Maybe, what is it with college? I think it's the first 2 years in the dorm or right. It's first 2 years. I see it lasting through that. I don't see them getting an apartment together. Certainly not. But, they'll make new friends for that. But yeah, I think the first 2 years they would stay in the same dorm and successfully not kill each other. Seth is a different story. Seth and Fogel, yeah, that'd be it.
That would end in a homicide.
Right, exactly.
Having the longest time away from high school on this, first off, they may remain friends. I'm going to have one of my high school friends coming and visiting me in 2 weeks when I'm going to be home alone. So, but for the most part, you separate, and it is hard. And as far as killing each other, I had roommates. I had several roommates my first year of college, and I wanted to kill them all. In fact, I'm not going to mention the fact that one of them may be missing yet to this day. Just coincidence.
Yeah, you're not reassuring anyone on a
I was
very
about-
public platform here.
Just kidding. Okay. But anyway, but I realized very
There is
fast.
no one buried on our back 40 at the office. No
Correct.
one.
Yeah. No, not yet anyway. Anyway, I realized very soon that if I had a roommate by my second year, I was going to kill them. So I just made sure I had a single room for the remaining 3 years I had or was on campus for that very reason.
Let's see here. Does Fogel ever go to the police academy? And if so, I guess if he does not, what is the most likely profession for him?
Well, I do think Fogel loves the movies. I think he grew up watching the Police Academy movies. I could see that as being his type of thing. But as far as actually going, no. I don't. I have a feeling that, after college, he would kind of, he would want to, but I feel like, the character of Fogel really idolizes the two cops, and that doesn't change. As despicable as their behavior does, he looks up to them. So I could see him wanting to go in that line of work. What line of work would Fogel go into, though?
I will say his irrational confidence would lead me to believe he'd be perfect for this era of politics.
Yeah, I think he would get interested in politics. Funny enough, I do remember in 2008, Christopher Mintz-Plasse did make some Obama PSA videos as Fogel. So there might be some there might be something to that idea. But yes, which I didn't write about that in the book because I forgot that was a thing until this moment when he brought up politics. But yeah, I think he would, I think he would have a normal job that he'd be very, very bored by. And, I don't know, maybe he would, I don't know how bright I don't think of him as being that bright. So it's not like he would, go on to.
He got into Dartmouth.
I know.
He can't be stupid.
Yeah, which is strange because
unless he was a legacy,
he might have been Flounder. I don't know. Although Flounder got into Delta, but still, which is not the best fraternity. But
yeah,
Animal House, by the way, for anyone.
I know Lambda.
Right. But yeah, I don't know what Fogel. Probably boring job, and then eventually want to, maybe get into politics.
How long before Michaels and Slater are suspended?
Oh, pretty.
The thing is they probably have a very strong union, so even if they do get suspended, it's going to be very short.
I imagine. I don't see. Yeah, I imagine. I don't think their captain's thrilled with them. I think there are a lot of complaints, a lot of things to cover up. I think, I definitely think that they would, at some point, one of them would get suspended for something, but it wouldn't be what you would expect it to be suspended for. It'd be like, it'd be something incredibly minimal compared to what we see them do in the
film. They will never be suspended. They will be given an opportunity to resign, and they will end up becoming chief of police in some rural community in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and continue that behavior, and it'll be greatly accepted.
That is a good point. Yeah. I don't want to get too much into it because I was about to tell a very real story that's a little too close to some people I know. But yes, there's. I have to bite my tongue on that one. But yes, you know what? You're right. I don't. And even if they were suspended, they'd never learn their lessons. No, of course not. No, it's everybody else. They're police officers. They went to school that enables them to do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah, exactly.
His wife was a prostitute.
Right.
He didn't catch it. He didn't realize it. Well, it was a group sex. I heard it. I wasn't invited on my wedding night. Okay. Yeah.
It's and also I love that they're also like they're. I think they're dangerous because they're not the brightest, sharpest tools in the shed. I mean, the whole M&M discussion, like, come on, like, like an actual M&M. Like, this is I'm no artist, but this is an actual M&M. Like, come on. Yeah, it's we laugh at those characters, but we also kind of wince a little bit as well.
Well, we don't have any listener questions at the moment, so unless somebody wants to submit something quick, we'll turn it over. Dan, do you have any remaining questions?
Oh, I have a couple. One, is Seth Rogen going to end up with a tariff since he is Canadian?
Ooh. I don't know, but if he does, we're going to hear about it. He will fight. Like, he is someone that is very outspoken, and God love him for it. Like, one of my favorite Seth Rogen stories is he was at Saturday Night Live backstage, and he heard the name of the executive that canceled Freaks and Geeks. He walked up to that executive and immediately, this is 13 years later, went into it with him. And then went into Twitter to admit to it. And yes, I called him out. Like, that's Seth Rogen. And by the way, I totally agree. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, because I don't want to get into too much about Freaks and Geeks, but yes, I mean, it was a perfect show, and it definitely had a fan base, and there were enough things pointing to keep that show going, but the executive that canceled it went to private school, so he saw nothing in Freaks and Geeks because there was no fencing club, so he couldn't relate to that show.
I have two general questions. One is
general question.
Yes. One is what is the future of R-rated comedies? I think we've kind of I'm trying to figure out how to put this delicately. I think we've kind of rooted out a lot of the past history that led to Me Too and dealt with it. Yes. Are we kind of coming back to having R-rated comedies, but being more socially responsible in doing them?
Absolutely. And I feel like, socially responsible is definitely, a big part of it. And by the way, like, people that bemoan, oh, you can't make R-rated comedies, you can't do this. I think you can't make lazy R-rated comedies anymore. That you cannot make a lazy R-rated comedy. As a comedian, you're supposed to want to work harder to get the laughs. All you have to do is work a little bit harder now to not be offensive. You can't throw out, you can't go for the low-hanging fruit like you could before, but you shouldn't have done it before. Anyway, that's not my soapbox. My answer is yes, we're going to see R-rated comedies come back. And I thought the first R-rated comedy that I saw come out that I really thought this is it was Cocaine Bear. The trailer for Cocaine Bear came out online. And I don't know if you guys remember the reaction to it, because basically it was a story that went viral that became a movie. And people are like, I can't believe this is real. Like, oh my God, a movie about a bear that does cocaine? That's got to be a parody. We're going to go see it. This is going to be amazing. Oh my, everyone was so excited in December 2022 when the trailer dropped. I was pumped. I'm like, I can't believe this is real. This is going to change everything. This is going to overtake the world. A stupid movie coming out in February, Valentine's Day, I believe. Movie came out, did fine at the box office. Did fine. Did not change the world. Did not change R-rated comedies. It's going to have a life within the next 5 years on Peacock, sure. But that was the movie that I thought was going to have an impact. So much so I wrote about it in the book, is I thought that was going to change it. And it didn't. And, even more than a movie like Long Shot. Like, people point to Long Shot as, like, that was the first time when they realized, oh, R-rated comedies are dead. But that was a romantic comedy, which is a different category. I mean, Cocaine Bear checked every box for me as this movie's going to make 150, $200 million at the box office, and it just didn't. I think we're have an uphill battle with streaming competition. I think it's going to come back, but it's going to be tough.
Well, the one concept I had or idea I've kicked around in my head is a group of 20-something couples at Mardi Gras. And all of the adventures and problems and weird things that can happen on Bourbon Street at Mardi Gras.
I think they call that girls' trip.
Is that Mardi Gras?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never seen the film, but I mean, I think you could do something along that concept. But you do mention through the streaming, which is the other question I have. Since the pandemic and the balkanization of entertainment, I mean, we got streaming and TikTok and YouTube and all the other things that people can spend time on. Are we going to have a problem with modest budget films making any money again in the future?
See, to me, that's the bigger thing when it comes to how do these movies make money. Andrew mentioned way earlier before the rentals and how much it did in DVD sales and some of that. You think of all the comedies that we've discussed on the show, Dodgeball and Office Space and Zoolander, they all had this second life where people could rewatch and rewatch and rewatch stuff. That's not quite there in the same way for the financials that it was. And I think that has had more of a significant effect on these even being made than the appetite for comedy.
Well, the only reason I would say that I have some misgivings as to the pessimism by that statement is the way that shows like Suits have had a second life on streaming where people discover them. You know, I think if you were to put together a modestly budgeted film that was really well done, well written, held up, and it didn't have a lot of success at the box office, that you could get it on streaming and with the right marketing with your streaming partner, find an audience.
Absolutely. And by the way, I don't know how much experience you guys have had about seeing movies in theaters that were made for streaming. I've seen Netflix movies before. Usually around award seasons, a Netflix movie might occasionally come out in the theater if they're really pushing for it. Because I think Oscars do, or I don't know, I think it's changed. I don't think they have the rule anymore, but they did for the longest time. I had to play a week in cinema somewhere. So you can tell the difference between a movie made for streaming and a movie that was made theatrically. You just can usually because of the budget, because of the way it was shot, and just there is a vibe to just how the presentation of it all. Movies are edited. They're not in theaters. They were edited to hold for a laugh. If they were edited because we need to add an extra 5 seconds here because the laugh is too big. You don't edit like that for streaming. You're not editing for a laugh for the home viewer. The home viewer can rewind it. So it is edited differently. Different considerations are taken. I do feel like the budget are tough without home media, without physical media. I can hold this DVD. They can't rely. DVD sales are gone. Blu-ray sales gone. It's been gone for years. I think before we get to the studio comedies, we have to get back to the latter. I think we need to get back to 10, 15 million indie comedies that the studios have under their umbrella before we get back to The Hangover, 35 million, move on to, 50, 60, 70 million comedies. But we also have an issue, which is, I don't even know if it's an issue, but movies like The Fall Guy are labeled as a comedy. Barbie is presented as a comedy. I don't know if I would call those comedies initially. Barbie a little more, but it kind of changes what is a comedy and what's just it feels like a studio movie, not a comedy. It feels like
Well, The Fall Guy to
Yeah.
me feels very reminiscent of a lot of 80s like action comedies,
Yes.
Yeah.
like 48 Hours and
Right.
Beverly Hills Cop and something like
I
that. It's
love
a
those movies.
different brand, but I think it does fall within at least comedy to me, even though like Beverly Hills Cop is not on the page funny. Eddie
No, but
just
it's Eddie.
makes it that way.
Oh, Eddie. Yeah,
But
it's comedic more than a
yeah,
comedy.
Yeah. Well, one of the thoughts I've had about this is if you're going to do the lower budget comedies, why don't we go back to the old studio days in the 40s and 50s and actually pair them up? You have one that's a 15, $20 million budget, and you have a second feature that you show in combination with it. So it's like the B films. And you have a $5, $10 million budget comedy that follows it and pair them together. That
That is
people would
definitely
be
important.
perceived of getting a better deal for their dollar.
That is a great point. Um, and it is something that I have. Um, and by the way, my view on it is a little skewed because I do live out here, and I'll go to see a movie. Like I'll see a lot of retro movies out here, and they'll do the old school cartoons and trailers and stuff before the movies. And I went to see, I'll see a sold out screening of a movie from the 80s or 90s. And it just makes me feel different than when I go to an AMC and I'm one of 5 people in there.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're right, though. Like there needs to be something more. And I mean, I love double features. I feel like a double feature would work in this day and age. It'd have to be the right combination, though.
Yeah.
I don't know if people, but attention spans is the other part of it. I don't know if people want a 3-hour, 4-hour outing to the movie theater anymore. The price point. It have to be, you're paying for 2 movies versus 1. People already complain how expensive movie theaters are. So that would have to be taken into consideration as well. A combined price point.
Yes.
certainly.
So
devoid of any additional questions at this point, I just want to remind everybody, Andrew, where are you on social media and what are you working on other than the book, I guess? Do you have any upcoming projects? And then we'll make sure that we remind everybody where the book is. It's coming out on Tuesday.
Yes, I am on Twitter and Instagram at Andrew L. Buss, Buss. As far as upcoming projects,
yeah, I was curious about that myself.
I'm trying to think. There's one I absolutely wish I could talk about because I would talk about it for 15, 20 minutes. I can't. Which makes me seem more important than I am. I promise, but I'll come back when I can talk about it because it's one of the coolest things I'll ever get to do. But what I will say is I'll plug a recent thing then, which is I came out with the article on a Vanity Fair article earlier this year where I talked to 17 writers about their first week at Saturday Night Live that I'm really proud of. So it's an oral history. I talked to Chevy Chase, talked to Colin Jost, Sarah Silverman, Robert Smigel, Jim Downey. I mean, just a lot. JB Smoove, Paula Pell. I talked to a lot of really cool people about Saturday Night Live. I'm a huge Saturday Night Live fan. I'm really excited for the 50th tomorrow. And
I watched the original.
You watched it that night?
I watched the original release that night.
Which they're re-airing tonight, but
correct.
That's so cool. I will plug this then. I am the official historian and archivist for Andy Kaufman. So
I saw that.
Yes.
So
and there is an Andy Kaufman documentary. It's not listed. It's not named yet. There's no release date. The trailer hasn't dropped yet. But there is a Andy Kaufman documentary that I am a consultant on coming out that has some cool names attached. David Letterman's a producer. The Rock is a producer, so it's pretty cool. Um, that's coming out, so I can plug that. Yeah, I'll give you. I'll plug. I can plug that one, and I'm really excited for people to keep talking about Andy because I've been kind of in this job for 10 years, and yeah, I mean I'll do whatever I can to help keep that guy's legacy alive because it's
Well,
he helped
I grew
define,
up with Taxi,
of
and that's where
course.
I first saw him, and then
Hmm.
watching him on Saturday Night Live. So yes.
Yeah, I mean he defined a comedy movement. He is a rare performer where his name became a thing, Kaufman esque. Oh, that's kind of Kaufman esque, kind of like I can't think of many comedians that became a thing, a description, if you will. So,
And to bring it full circle, he
mhm.
wrestled a playmate. Her name was
Yes.
Susan Smith.
Hmm.
She went to my high school,
Really?
and her brother was in my class.
Wow. That's so cool. Yeah, Susan Smith. It was on the Playboy channel.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I think I have that issue somewhere around
Oh,
here.
I
She's
do.
not. I have it somewhere.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Dad. That was something I really wanted to know.
I liked how quick you were. Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Yes. No, it's
Do you
yeah.
know the name of the documentary yet?
No, we're not. Yeah, we're not. Yeah,
I
I
would
don't
be
yet.
interested in that. I always enjoy those things because, you know,
Yeah, it's a really cool documentary. Yeah, it'll be out. Yeah, I'm not sure when. They're still working on all that stuff on the back end, but all I can tell you
I'm
is it's
I,
got some cool people involved.
I'm such a comedy nerd. About 10 years ago, the IT guy said that we needed to expand our server, and
Hmm.
it was predominantly because Dana has so much stuff stored in his computer space. And so my wife comes in and goes, who's the office manager, and is like, "What are you having stored on your computer?" And I kind of chuckled because, of course, she thought the worst. And I'm like, I found a website, then I downloaded all of the Jack Benny radio programs.
I love that. I
And
mean,
yeah, and I listened to them all. So,
oh yeah. I mean,
yeah, so
that's
yeah, but
I'm a huge comedy nerd. I mean, I talk about the Three Stooges, but I discovered the Marx Brothers on my own. I mean, I discovered the Producers became my favorite movie of all time when I was 10. Like when people talk about Mel Brooks, they're like, "Oh, I love Blazing Saddles. I love Young Frankenstein." I'm like, "It's the Producers. That's his best film." So
mm-hmm,
I've got a
it,
signed LP right over there. I've been lucky enough to get to interview Mr. Brooks a couple of times. I've got a signed LP of the Producers right over there, one of my prized possessions. He is the nicest man. He just he took a liking to me, and I can't be more. He's on my Mount Rushmore comedy. It just absolute let him and Conan O'Brien, Andy Kaufman. Those are my guys. Like there's something about their humor that defined me. So
so, by the way, I would just wanted to compliment you. First off, as somebody who has reads a lot and both for work and pleasure, you have a very nice writing style.
oh my god, thank you.
It's easy to digest. It's fun to follow along. It's got a nice pace to it. So I want to compliment you. Second thing is again, I would plug your book, even if you don't know anything about Superbad or care about the movie. Your assessment of how a movie comes together and how producers get involved and how they cast and everything else was just really enlightening.
Thank you.
And for no other reason, that would be worth the time spending in the book. It's a quick read.
It is.
I mean, I sat down and I would, well, I'll admit it. Thursdays are kind of a stress point in my week. And so I'll leave a little early and I have a group of friends I meet for dinner on Thursday nights. I'll go an hour and a half early and just sit and do something for an hour and a half with a beer. And I finished your book sitting there, and I went through an hour and a half, and I didn't even realize that it had been an hour and a half as I was reading it. So,
So great. Such a great compliment. Thank you.
so
And I would agree too. I think that the book is well worth the time. Again, the title is I Am McLovin, How Superbad Became the Biggest Comedy Hit of Its Generation. And that is releasing on Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, in case anybody is picking this up well after the fact. Even though this is a live stream, we will keep this on the channel as well as release the audio version of this on our regular feed come tomorrow. So, but again, thank you very much for being with us and giving so much of your time. We're at 2.5 hours. I think we planned this for an hour and a half originally, but certainly glad to have you with us. And
I talk a lot. I apologize.
Oh no, it's just fine. That works well for podcasts. I'm just so glad I don't have to edit this.
Right, there you go. I am as well. Great.
But again, thank you very much for being with us. I think we can wrap it up for the day. And we'll just do a quick outro here. But thank you, everybody that's been with us. And thank you for listening, watching, or however you've picked up the content so far. We very much appreciate it. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at ronnieduncanstudios.com or at greatestaltimemovie.podcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMotePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM. Our recording studio is Riverside FM. And there we go.
Perfect.